Why? Why do I crave you so much? You're not just an object. You're destruction itself. You've taken everything. Zayn, Maya, the trust of the villagers, and even my own self.
What happens when the power you desire comes with a price too great to bear? A friendship shattered, a village plunged into chaos, a man consumed by ambition standing on the edge of redemption. This is the story of Jaylen, a man who dared to challenge fate but lost everything in his pursuit of more. Will he find forgiveness? Once upon a time, in a peaceful little village nestled along the banks of the Chattahoochee River in Georgia, there were two inseparable best friends named Jaylen and Zayn. From their childhood days, they had been an inseparable pair, sharing every beautiful moment of their youth together. Every morning, as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the golden rice fields, Jaylen and Zayn would run across the village's dirt paths, their bare feet dusted with earth, and their laughter echoing like a cheerful melody, heralding a new day. When the sun rose higher, casting its intense rays over the village, the two friends would gather with other children to play basketball on a small red dirt court at the village centre. Zayn, with his tall build and strong arms, was often the leader, while Jaylen, smaller but clever, always found ways to surprise everyone with his skillful passes. Their games were not just a source of joy, but a bond that made the entire village adore these lively and generous young men. As the evening descended and the fiery sunset reflected on the Chattahoochee's waters, Jaylen and Zayn would bring their fishing rods to the riverbank. Sitting side by side, they watched the calm waters, waiting for fish to bite. In those tranquil moments, they shared everything with each other, from the trivialities of the day to their grand dreams for the future. Jaylen, with his eyes always brimming with curiosity and determination, often spoke of his desire to build a better life for his family. Meanwhile, Zayn, though less talkative, harbored ambitions of becoming a leader in their community, bringing prosperity to the village they both cherished. Their bond was not just friendship, but akin to brotherhood. The villagers often remarked that Jaylen and Zayn were shining examples of unity and kindness. They were always ready to help those around them, whether it was assisting the elderly in repairing their homes or looking after children while their parents worked in the fields. Their generous hearts and genuine sincerity earned them admiration and affection from everyone in the village. What made Jaylen and Zayn truly special was the grand dreams they always shared. Even as young boys, they vowed that one day they would build an empire of their own, a place that would bring happiness and prosperity not just to themselves but to their entire community. They believed that even starting from nothing, their companionship and determination would enable them to achieve anything they set their hearts on. "We're going to achieve greatness," Jaylen once declared, his eyes gleaming under the sunset. "From dawn till dusk, we will never stop trying." Zayn nodded, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "Yes, we'll do it, because we'll never leave each other behind." That promise was not just empty words, but a deep commitment built on the foundation of unwavering friendship and trust. The children in the village often looked up to Jaylen and Zayn as role models. They dreamed of one day doing something extraordinary, just like these two friends. To the children, Jaylen and Zayn were not just companions, but heroes in their hearts, inspiring hope and faith for the entire village. Maya, the most beautiful girl Jaylen and Zayn had ever met, appeared like a radiant light that illuminated the small village by the Chattahoochee River. She wasn't just the pride of the village, but the desire of every young man in the region. Maya's beauty was unlike anyone else's. Her long, silky black hair shimmered like moonlight. Her smooth skin was as flawless as jade, and her deep, soulful eyes seemed to hold an entire ocean of emotions. Whenever she walked into a room, all eyes instantly turned toward her. Maya didn't just captivate gazes, she captured hearts. It was undeniable that she was the shining star of the village. Jaylen and Zayn, best friends as close as brothers, were no exception. From the moment they first saw Maya, they felt something change within them. Maya, with her natural grace and a smile that could light up any space, left a profound impression. However, both Jaylen and Zayn kept their feelings to themselves, not just out of shyness, but because they deeply valued their long-standing friendship. Yet, such feelings could not remain hidden forever, and slowly, they began to seep into their relationship. At first, they tried to ignore the growing emotions inside them. They continued playing basketball together under the scorching sun and fishing by the river in the evenings, but those moments were no longer as simple as before. Whenever Maya appeared, the air between Jaylen and Zayn seemed to shift. The glances that once shared mutual understanding and trust now carried an unspoken tension. Maya, though unintentionally, fueled the underlying rivalry between them with every smile or word of praise. Whether she laughed at Jaylen's clever remarks or complimented Zayn's strength, each moment added to the silent fire growing between the two friends. Gradually, their conversations became shorter, and the once comfortable silences stretched into awkward gaps, signaling the changing dynamics of their friendship. Jaylen, typically the more reserved of the two, began to feel uncomfortable whenever Zayn went out of his way to impress Maya. He couldn't help but notice how Zayn always found opportunities to be near her, whether it was picking up a book she dropped or inviting her to sit by the campfire. What Jaylen once would have overlooked now weighed heavily on his heart. Meanwhile, Zayn, confident and decisive by nature, also sensed the change in Jaylen. He noticed how Jaylen avoided eye contact whenever Maya was around and how his usual silence now felt distant. Zayn couldn't deny that he, too, felt a growing sense of competition with his closest friend. One evening, as the three of them sat by the river, Maya turned to Jaylen and asked a simple question. "Do you like watching sunsets?" Taken by surprise but maintaining his composure, Jaylen nodded and replied, "Yes. It's the most peaceful time of the day." Maya smiled, her gentle gaze seeming to peer into his soul. That fleeting moment was enough for Zayn to realize that Jaylen didn't see Maya as just a friend. From that day on, the cracks in Jaylen and Zayn's friendship became more apparent. They no longer played or laughed together as they once did. Their everyday banter now carried an undercurrent of tension, and even harmless conversations seemed to be filled with subtle, veiled remarks. Whenever Maya was present, both Jaylen and Zayn felt the need to vie for her attention, pushing them further apart. Maya, though not fully aware of her impact, began to notice the changes as well. She saw how Jaylen and Zayn, once inseparable, now spoke less to each other, and when they did, it lacked the ease and warmth of the past. Maya wondered if she might be the cause, but her carefree nature kept her from dwelling too much on it. Life in the village continued as usual, but for Jaylen and Zayn, everything had changed. Afternoons by the river or on the basketball court, once symbols of their steadfast friendship, were now mere memories. Maya's presence, though unintentional, became the gust of wind that shifted everything, driving the two best friends into a silent struggle neither of them had ever wished for. One quiet afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, its golden rays filtered gently through the dense leaves of an old oak tree that had borne witness to countless memories of Jaylen and Zayn. The air was still, with only the distant chirping of birds and the soft rustling of leaves breaking the silence. Zayn stood there, his hands clenched, his eyes filled with determination yet betraying a hint of tension. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. This was not just a simple conversation. It was the most pivotal moment in their long-standing friendship. "Jaylen," Zayn began, his voice hoarse as though he had been suppressing these emotions for a long time. He stepped closer to his best friend, his bright eyes locking onto Jaylen's. "I have to tell you this. I can't keep it hidden anymore. I love Maya." Those final words echoed like a solemn vow, strong and unwavering. Zayn's heart pounded fiercely in his chest, but he refused to break eye contact with Jaylen, hoping to convey the sincerity behind every word. "This feeling is so overwhelming that I can't keep it bottled up any longer. She makes my heart race like a drum, as if the world fades away every time I see her. I've never felt like this about anyone else." Zayn's voice was full of emotion, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of anxiety. He knew his words had the power to change everything. Jaylen, leaning against the trunk of the oak tree, felt as though the world had suddenly stopped spinning. He looked at Zayn, his deep brown eyes meeting the earnest gaze of his friend. Within Jaylen's heart, a storm of emotions rose: surprise, pain, and, above all, an indescribable fear. He loved Maya too. She had occupied his thoughts and dreams for so long, but Jaylen had always buried those feelings, unwilling to hurt Zayn, his closest friend. Silence enveloped the space between them. The wind continued to rustle through the leaves, but to Jaylen, all sound seemed distant. He couldn't find the words to respond to Zayn. His throat tightened. His heart pounded erratically, as if torn between reason and emotion. Jaylen's silence was not just a refusal to speak. It was an unspoken confession that he too loved Maya, but valued his friendship with Zayn so deeply that he was willing to sacrifice his own feelings. Zayn, sensing the prolonged silence, felt unease creep into his chest. He tried to remain calm, but he couldn't stop himself from asking, "Jaylen, why aren't you saying anything? What do you think about this? Don't you feel anything?" His voice, initially firm, now carried a tinge of uncertainty. Jaylen closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to quell the storm within. "I don't know what to say, Zayn," he finally replied, his voice soft yet sincere. "Your feelings are clear, and I understand them, but I can't say anything more right now." Zayn's expression flickered with disappointment and pain. He took a step back, as though physical distance could make acceptance easier. "I don't want to ruin this friendship, Jaylen," Zayn said, his voice trembling but steady. "But I can't deny how I feel I had to say this." Jaylen remained silent, his eyes reflecting the inner turmoil he was experiencing. He wanted to tell Zayn that he felt the same way, that Maya was more than just another girl in the village. She was someone who had transformed everything in his heart. But he couldn't. He didn't want to be the one to hurt Zayn or be the reason for a fracture in their steadfast bond. "Zayn, I understand how you feel," Jaylen finally said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I don't want us to lose what we have because of this. You're my best friend, and I don't want anything to change." His voice was soft, yet it carried a weight of sincerity and unspoken sorrow that words couldn't fully express. Zayn turned away, not wanting Jaylen to see the anguish in his eyes. He knew Jaylen was hiding something, but he also knew that pressing his friend to reveal it would only make things worse. "I don't want to lose you, Jaylen," Zayn whispered, his voice carried by the wind. "But I can't ignore my feelings either." They stood there under the canopy of the old oak tree, each burdened by their own pain. Their friendship, once unbreakable, now faced its greatest test. Both knew that this would change everything, but neither could predict where it would lead. The wind continued to blow, carrying fallen leaves to the ground, as if nature itself silently bore witness to the first cracks in the beautiful friendship between Jaylen and Zayn. Finally, Maya chose Zayn as her life partner. The news spread quickly throughout the village, like a gust of wind carrying blessings and excitement as preparations for the couple's joyous day began. But for Jaylen, those words struck like daggers carving deep into his heart. When he heard that Maya had chosen Zayn, Jaylen felt as if his entire world had suddenly crumbled. His heart ached, as if shattered pieces were falling into the deepest recesses of his soul. The woman he loved, the one he had dreamed of building a future with, now belonged to Zayn. Each time Jaylen thought of Maya's radiant smile beside Zayn, his heart filled with bitterness and sorrow. He couldn't understand why Maya had chosen Zayn, why his best friend was the one she loved. Inside Jaylen, a growing conflict festered. The pain of losing Maya and the sense of betrayal by his lifelong friendship with Zayn. Hatred and jealousy began to smolder in his heart, like a small but persistent flame consuming the trust and bond he and Zayn had once shared. Jaylen no longer wanted to be friends with Zayn. Every time he saw Zayn, he no longer saw the close friend who had shared in all his joys and sorrows. Instead, he saw someone who had stolen the happiness he longed for. Jaylen tried to distance himself from both Zayn and Maya, avoiding any interaction with them. When Zayn invited him to the palace, where Zayn now ruled as the village leader, Jaylen found ways to decline. "I have no reason to go there," he said coldly, his voice detached. Zayn, despite his efforts to mend their friendship, couldn't break through the wall Jaylen had built. Jaylen's days became unbearably long. and empty. He wandered along the banks of the Chattahoochee River, a place once filled with fond memories of him and Zayn. But now, the river only reminded him of pain. Every ripple on the water seemed to echo the moments he and Zayn had shared. Fishing trips, hearty laughter, and dreams of a future they once envisioned together. But all of that was now buried beneath the shadows of jealousy and heartbreak. Jaylen couldn't stop thinking about Maya. In his mind, her image remained vivid, from her gentle smile and deep, soulful eyes, to her warm voice that sent his heart racing every time he heard it. He remembered their conversations, the times she laughed at his stories, but harsh reality would pull him back. Maya was no longer his, and perhaps she never was. She belonged to Zayn, and Jaylen couldn't bear the thought. Each evening, as the sunset bathed the river in golden hues, Jaylen would sit alone, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He sought answers to the questions tormenting his mind. Why had Maya chosen Zayn? Why was he, someone who loved her deeply, left unreciprocated? And above all, why was Zayn, his closest friend, the one who made him feel most betrayed? An idea began to form in Jaylen's mind, growing stronger each day. He had to win Maya back. The thought became an obsession, a constant whisper in his mind urging him to act. Yet every time he considered hurting Zayn, Jaylen was overwhelmed by a conflicting sense of guilt. He didn't want to hurt his friend, but he also couldn't let go of his love for Maya. As time passed, Jaylen's pain did not fade. It only grew deeper. He felt isolated, abandoned in a world that once seemed full of hope. Day after day, Jaylen continued wandering the riverbanks, as if searching for something, perhaps answers or perhaps just a moment of peace, amidst the unending storms in his heart. But the river, in its silent flow, brought him no solace. Instead, it reflected the loneliness and emptiness within him. Jaylen knew he stood at a crucial crossroads in his life. He had to decide, to remain consumed by hatred and jealousy, or to find a way to forgive and let go. But that choice was far from easy. The darkness in his heart grew larger every day, and Jaylen wasn't sure if he had the strength to overcome it. One day, as the sun faded on the horizon, Jaylen sat quietly in the town square. This place, once bustling with laughter and gatherings, now seemed to hold only his lonely silhouette. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves, whispering stories Jaylen didn't want to hear. He hung his head low, his eyes deep in thought, his heart heavy with emotions he couldn't shake. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Jaylen looked up to see a mysterious man approaching. The man was unusual, with an enigmatic presence and piercing eyes that seemed to see right through a person's soul. He wore a long black cloak, worn boots, and carried a finely carved staff. Each step he took seemed to carry an indescribable aura of mystery. The man stopped in front of Jaylen, locking eyes with him. "You seem burdened by something," he said, his voice deep and warm but shrouded in intrigue. "I can help you change your destiny." Jaylen eyed the man warily. "Who are you? And how do you know I want to change my destiny?" he asked, his voice tinged with skepticism and curiosity. The man gave a faint smile, as though he had been expecting the question. "My name is unimportant. What matters is that I know what you're seeking. Deep beneath the earth, in a place where no light reaches, there lies a treasure of untold power. It is not gold or jewels, but an artifact of unimaginable strength. With it, you can rewrite your destiny. Nothing will be beyond your reach." Jaylen listened to the man's words, his mind a whirl of conflict. He was drawn to the promise of power and possibility, yet couldn't shake his doubt. "Why are you telling me this? And how can I trust that what you're saying is true?" Jaylen asked, his cautious gaze unwavering. The mysterious man tilted his head, his lips curling into an unreadable smile. "I'm not asking you to trust me, but I know what you desire deep within your heart. A way out, a chance to turn things around. I'm merely offering you an opportunity. You can choose to believe me or not. But remember, chances like this don't come often. The man's words echoed in Jaylen's mind, stirring an irresistible curiosity. He wanted to refuse, to walk away and forget everything, but deep down, the thought of power and the chance to change his fate was too tempting to ignore. He thought of Maya, of Zayn and all he had lost. If this could truly give him the chance to reclaim what he yearned for, could he afford not to take the risk? "Where is this treasure?" Jaylen asked, his voice low but resolute, as if his question confirmed his decision. The man gazed at Jaylen, his eyes glinting with mystery. "It lies deep in the dark lands where no one dares to tread. The journey is far from easy and the trials along the way will test your courage. But if you truly desire to change your fate, you will find a way." Jaylen sat silently for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the ground. His thoughts clashed and tangled. He knew the journey could be perilous, but he also knew he couldn't go on living in his current misery. The thought of power and redemption, of reclaiming Maya and proving his worth, burned like a fire within him. "I'll do it," Jaylen finally said, his voice steadier than it had ever been. "I'll find this treasure." The mysterious man smiled as if he had known the answer all along. "Very well, but remember, power does not always bring happiness. It only magnifies what's already in your heart. If your heart is full of hatred, power will only bring more pain. Are you ready to face yourself?" Jaylen didn't answer. He didn't know if he was ready, but he knew he couldn't return to the life he was living. With determination and inner turmoil, he stood, his eyes set firmly on the horizon, where the shadows of his journey awaited. The mysterious man turned and walked away, his figure fading into the twilight. Yet his words lingered in Jaylen's mind, like a distant echo guiding him toward an uncertain adventure. Jaylen knew this would be a dangerous journey, but in his heart the flame of desire had been ignited. He was willing to risk everything to change his fate. One afternoon, as the golden sunlight bathed the Chattahoochee River, Jaylen walked slowly along its banks, checking his fish traps. The surroundings were as familiar as ever, with the wind rustling through the trees and the gentle murmur of the flowing water. Yet peace eluded Jaylen. His mind remained consumed by unrelenting thoughts of Maya, of Zayn, and of everything he had lost. He threw himself into his work, but even this solitary task couldn't ease the ache in his heart. As Jaylen reached a secluded bend in the river, where the sunlight sparkled on the crystal-clear water, an unexpected sight stopped him in his tracks. Before him, seated on a large rock in the middle of the river, was a mysterious being. She was a beautiful mermaid, her long, flowing hair cascading like a shimmering waterfall, her skin smooth and radiant like polished pearl. She brushed her hair with a golden comb, her gentle singing echoing through the air like a melody from another world. But what truly stunned Jaylen was the radiant crown beside her on the rock. It emitted dazzling rays of light, as if crafted from fragments of sunlight itself. Jaylen's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the crown. Its brilliance didn't just illuminate the scene. It seemed to awaken the deepest desires and ambitions buried within him. He didn't know where it came from, but a clandestine thought began to take root in his mind. If he could possess the crown, could his life change? Could he reclaim all that he longed for? Driven by this temptation, Jaylen decided to move closer. He treaded softly, careful not to make a sound. The mermaid continued brushing her hair, her song drowning out all other noises. Each step Jaylen took felt guided by an invisible force, and before long, he was close enough to touch the rock. His gaze locked onto the crown, its glow reflecting the hunger in his eyes. Unable to restrain himself, Jaylen reached out in a swift motion and grabbed the crown. The moment his hand touched it, the crown's light flared, sending a surge of energy coursing through his body. Jaylen felt as though he were holding a piece of the heavens. But in that very instant, the mermaid turned to him. Her eyes, a mix of shock and pain, met his. "Stop!" she cried, her voice reverberating across the river like the lament of a wounded soul. But Jaylen didn't look back. Fear and ambition intertwined in his heart, propelling him to run. The river roared as if enraged, but Jaylen paid no heed. He sprinted through the thickets, down narrow paths leading home, his mind consumed by one thought. He had claimed something that could change everything. Back at his house, Jaylen slammed the door shut, his breaths ragged. He stared at the crown in his hands, his eyes gleaming with a mix of exhilaration and fervour. The crown's radiant light danced across his face, mirroring a sly, almost triumphant smile. Quickly, Jaylen hid the crown in a secret chamber, ensuring no one could find it. Standing there in the darkened room, the crown's glow became the sole source of light, a constant reminder that he now possessed a power far beyond his imagination. Outside Jaylen's house, the mermaid's anguished cries still echoed. The Chattahoochee River, once calm and nurturing, seemed to rebel. Waves rose higher and the wind began to howl. The river's familiar whispers transformed into eerie murmurs, as if it was spreading a warning. Yet Jaylen remained indifferent. At that moment, his mind fixated on the thought that the crown would change his fate and help him reclaim everything he had lost. Standing in the dim room, Jaylen couldn't yet comprehend that his actions would not only alter his life, but also unleash unforeseen consequences. The crown he held was not merely a symbol of power, but also a curse, a test for his heart and soul. But in that moment, Jaylen saw only its radiant light as a beacon of hope in the darkness of his life, and he was willing to do anything to keep it within his grasp. From the very moment Jaylen placed the crown in his hands, a strange and powerful energy surged through him, like electricity coursing through his body. He felt a profound transformation, an emotion unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The crown, with its radiant brilliance like the sun, was not just an exquisite piece of jewelry, it was a source of unimaginable power. Its light seemed to merge with his very being, flowing through his veins and breaths, making him feel as if he had become an entirely different person. In the first few days, the power of the crown brought Jaylen everything he had ever desired. His once empty pockets were now filled with gold and silver, and wealth seemed to materialize endlessly, as if it sprouted from the earth itself. Jaylen's modest wooden house transformed into a luxurious mansion adorned with glittering golden artifacts. He donned the finest clothing, the shiniest shoes, and golden rings on his fingers that sparkled like declarations of his newfound wealth to the world. The villagers looked at Jaylen with a mix of astonishment and envy. They whispered about his sudden fortune, yet none knew the mysterious crown's true origin. Jaylen, once an ordinary man, had become the center of everyone's attention. He felt as though he stood atop the world, holding everything he had once only dreamed of. However, it wasn't long before strange events began to unfold. The Chattahoochee River, once a source of life and joy for the village, began to change. Its waters, once clear and calm, turned murky and turbulent, like a wild beast. Unusual massive waves capsized fishermen's boats, and the gentle murmur of the river transformed into a menacing roar, as though the river itself was angry. The village fishermen, who had spent their lives tied to the river, began to disappear mysteriously. Hunters, familiar with every corner of the forest along the river, also failed to return from their journeys. Panic spread throughout the village, and the smiles once seen on the villagers' faces were replaced by fear and worry. Jaylen, though aware of the unusual occurrences, tried to convince himself it was mere coincidence. He believed that the losses had no connection to the crown. To him, the crown was a symbol of success, the key to achieving everything he had ever desired. Yet deep down, Jaylen began to feel an ever-growing unease. Every time he held the crown, it no longer brought him the joy it once did. Instead, he felt a chilling sensation, as though its radiant light concealed an unseen darkness. On long nights, while the village slept, Jaylen often awoke from vague nightmares. He dreamt of the river swallowing the entire village, of shadows disappearing into darkness never to return. And at the center of it all, he saw himself, clutching the crown as an eerie light radiated across the landscape. Whispers began to spread among the villagers. They couldn't understand why all the strange events coincided with Jaylen's transformation. Many avoided him, unwilling to meet his gaze, as if sensing something unnatural about him. Jaylen, once an integral part of the community, now found himself isolated in the very village where he had grown up. But he didn't care. He believed he had achieved what he wanted: wealth, power, and Maya's attention. He told himself that every sacrifice was worth it. What Jaylen didn't realize was that the crown was silently bringing destruction, not only to the village but to himself as well. The power it bestowed was not a gift but a curse. Each time he used it, a part of his soul seemed to wither away, and the darkness within him grew stronger. He couldn't explain why he felt increasingly lonely, why those who had once loved him now kept their distance. Yet the crown remained gleaming like the sun, a haunting reminder of the choice he had made. As time passed, the destruction spread further. Once lush fields withered away, birds that used to soar across the sky vanished, leaving an eerie silence. The village, once filled with laughter and life, had become a shadow of its former self, engulfed in confusion and fear. And at the center of it all stood Jaylen, isolated in his wealth, unable to see that what he had gained was not happiness, but punishment. The crown, though radiant, had become a symbol of tragedy. It was not only the cause of the chaos, but also a burden Jaylen was bound to carry. Every time he looked at it, he felt as though he was staring into a mirror, seeing himself suffocated by ambition and selfishness. Even when he realized this, he couldn't let it go. The crown had become a part of him, like a chain he couldn't break. Jaylen didn't know that from the moment he touched the crown, his fate and the fate of the village had been irrevocably altered. The power he craved was not liberation but a double-edged sword, bringing both light and shadow, and while the crown's brilliance continued to shine, the darkness it cast spread further and further, enveloping Jaylen and everything he had once held dear. The mermaid whose crown Jaylen had stolen was no ordinary creature. She was the princess of a mysterious underwater kingdom, a place untouched by those from the surface world, where light reached only in distant dreams. This kingdom, built of vibrant coral reefs and glistening pearls, was a symbol of harmony and beauty. The crown Jaylen had taken was not just an ornamental piece, but a symbol of power and sacred balance in their world. When the princess realized the crown was missing, her fury erupted like a violent storm over the ocean. Her deep blue eyes, which once radiated the gentle serenity of water, now burned with anger. Her cries echoed through the depths, blending with the currents, reverberating throughout the underwater kingdom. From tiny schools of fish to massive sea monsters, every sea creature felt the princess's pain and wrath. But she didn't just weep. She took action. She returned to the palace of her father, the King of the Deep, carrying her grievances and demanding justice. Upon hearing the news, the King of the Deep could not contain his anger. A ruler of immense authority, revered by all underwater creatures, he was also a loving father who cherished his daughter above all else. The theft of the crown was not merely an insult to the royal family, but a threat to the balance of their entire kingdom. The crown was not only a symbol of power, but also the key to maintaining the connection between the surface and underwater worlds, ensuring their harmony. Without it, this delicate balance was disrupted, leading to unforeseeable consequences. "Humans have gone too far," the king declared, his voice resounding like waves crashing against rocky shores. They must face the consequences of their actions. Determined to restore balance and punish the thief, the king ordered the summoning of all underwater creatures. His call resonated through every current, awakening every resident of the aquatic kingdom, from rainbow-hued schools of fish to enigmatic creatures dwelling in the deepest shadows, all gathered under the king's command. They prepared for a retribution the surface world had never witnessed. In the days that followed, chaos began to engulf Jaylen's village. The Chattahoochee River, once a source of peace and life, became wild and unpredictable. The water, once clear and gentle, turned murky and turbulent, roaring as though filled with rage. Villagers, who had always regarded the river as a companion, now felt betrayed. Fishing boats capsized unexpectedly, and fishermen, once familiar with every bend of the river, began disappearing mysteriously. "Something is terribly wrong," said an elderly fisherman, his eyes filled with worry as he watched the raging river. "The river is no longer our friend." Fear spread like wildfire across the village. Women began lighting incense and praying, while the men sought explanations for the strange phenomena. Yet no one could uncover the source of the chaos. All they knew was that everything was changing, and not for the better. Meanwhile, Jaylen, who had hidden the crown in a secret room in his house, began to feel the mounting weight of his actions. He couldn't deny that the strange occurrences seemed connected to the crown, but instead of regret, he felt an overwhelming fear. Every time he gazed upon the crown, its radiant glow seemed to call to him, whispering that its power and authority rightfully belonged to him. He convinced himself it was all a coincidence, that the chaos had nothing to do with him. Yet deep down, he knew otherwise. One morning before the sun had fully risen, the villagers awoke to find the riverside fields submerged. Unpredictable floods, their origins unknown, had drowned the crops they had hoped would sustain them. Fishermen no longer dared to set sail, and the villagers' laments filled the air. In their eyes, fear and despair grew more evident than ever. "What have we done to deserve this punishment?" a young woman asked, her voice trembling with sorrow. But no one had an answer. The river, once the lifeblood of the village, had become its enemy. Under the command of the king and the princess, underwater creatures unleashed relentless chaos. Gusts of wind carried sprays of water, fish vanished from sight, and strange sea creatures briefly appeared, terrifying the villagers. It became clear that this was not a natural disaster, but a supernatural reckoning. As the villagers descended further into despair, the princess's anger remained unquenched. She knew her crown still rested in Jaylen's hands, and she vowed to stop at nothing to retrieve it. "We will not only reclaim the crown," she told her father, her eyes shimmering like the ocean's surface, "we will teach them a lesson they will never forget." The king, exuding the dignity of a ruler, nodded in agreement. They will learn that every action carries consequences. The village, once a haven of peace, was now shrouded in fear and chaos. At the center of it all, Jaylen clung tightly to the crown, unaware that the power he coveted was wreaking destruction not only upon the village, but also upon himself. With each passing day, the shadow of retribution grew darker, and the crown, despite its brilliance, became a blazing fire consuming everything it touched. King Zayn, a ruler known for his compassion and wisdom, could not stand idly by as strange events unfolded in the village. Once a place filled with laughter and life, the village was now cloaked in fear and chaos. Villagers whispered of the Chattahoochee River, which had transformed into a raging beast, of fishermen and hunters mysteriously vanishing, and of sudden floods washing away their crops. Every plea for help from the villagers felt like a dagger to Zayn's heart. As king, he understood that it was his duty to protect his people and restore peace to the land they called home. Determined not to let the fear linger, King Zayn decided to take action. He summoned his most trusted advisors to uncover the cause of these calamities. Yet every discussion yielded no answers. "We need someone who understands these mysteries better than we do," Zayn said, his eyes shining with determination. "Take me to the wise woman." The wise woman, who lived on the outskirts of the village, was revered by all. With her silver hair and deep, knowing eyes, she was known as the keeper of ancient tales and secrets forgotten by time. When King Zayn arrived to see her, she sat calmly by the fire, weaving a basket from dried grass, her demeanor serene, yet commanding. "My lady," Zayn began, his voice filled with respect, "my villagers are suffering from misfortunes we cannot explain. I have come to seek your counsel, for no one knows more of wonders and mysteries than you." The wise woman raised her head, her eyes reflecting profound knowledge. She did not answer immediately, but tossed a handful of herbs into the fire, releasing a pale blue smoke that filled the air with a soothing aroma. She began to speak, her voice deep and deliberate, like the melody of an ancient song. "My king," she said, "the source of this chaos is not natural. It comes from man. The stolen crown from the underwater kingdom is the root of all these disasters, and the one who took it is none other than Jaylen." Zayn froze, his heart sinking as he heard the name. Jaylen, the childhood friend he trusted more than anyone else. He didn't want to believe it, but the wise woman's words, combined with the recent strange occurrences, felt like pieces of a painful puzzle coming together. "Jaylen has hidden the crown in his house," the wise woman continued. "The crown does not merely grant power to its bearer, but serves as a link between two worlds. When it was taken, that connection was severed, and the consequences are what you now see." Zayn lowered his head, his heart heavy with sorrow. He was not only heartbroken over Jaylen's actions, but also aware that he now faced one of the greatest challenges of his life, confronting the friend he regarded as a brother. Yet, as king, Zayn knew he could not let personal feelings dictate his decisions. He had to return the crown to its rightful place and restore peace to the village. "I understand," Zayn said, his voice steady but burdened. "I will do what must be done." With determination in his heart, Zayn, accompanied by his trusted guards, made his way to Jaylen's house. The atmosphere in the village was eerily silent, as though even the air held its breath in anticipation. When Zayn knocked on the door, Jaylen answered, his face filled with surprise and unease. "Zayn, why are you here?" Jaylen asked, his voice trembling. Zayn locked eyes with Jaylen, his gaze no longer that of a friend, but of a king. "Jaylen, I know about the crown," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "Return it immediately." Jaylen stepped back, his eyes betraying panic. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his shaky voice and trembling hands gave him away. "Don't deny it, Jaylen," Zayn said, his patience wearing thin. "The crown does not belong to you. It is the source of all the misfortunes the villagers are enduring. If you have any compassion left, return it." Jaylen remained silent, his eyes filled with conflict. He didn't want to part with something he had sacrificed so much to obtain. But, as he looked into Zayn's unwavering eyes, he knew he had no other choice. With trembling hands, Jaylen led Zayn and the guards to a secluded room. He opened a small wooden chest, revealing the crown glowing so brightly it illuminated the entire room. Zayn stepped forward and took the crown with both hands. He felt the strange power radiating from it, but instead of desire, he only felt sorrow and a heavy sense of duty. "I will return it to where it belongs," he said, turning to Jaylen. "Reflect on what you have done and find a way to make amends." With the crown in hand, Zayn and his entourage made their way to the banks of the Chattahoochee River. There he knelt by the water, holding the crown aloft. "O spirits of the river," he proclaimed, "I return what is yours, forgive us, and restore peace." As Zayn placed the crown into the water, a miracle occurred. The river, once raging with fury, became calm. Its waters turned clear and the crown's light spread across the area like a gentle embrace. Lost villagers began returning, the fields flourished again, and laughter filled the village once more. Zayn stood silently by the riverbank, his heart brimming with emotion. He had done what was necessary to restore peace, but he knew the cost was his bond with his closest friend. He hoped time would heal the wounds, but he also understood that some scars would remain forever. Peace had returned, but for Zayn, this was not a victory. It was a lesson. A lesson about responsibility, sacrifice, and the difficult decisions a king must make. On a somber and quiet evening, Jaylen sat alone by the Chattahoochee River. He gazed at the now calm, clear waters, but within him, a storm raged that refused to subside. The crown, a symbol of power he had once coveted, was now only a bitter memory. Everything had passed, but the price he paid was everything he once cherished. His friendship with Zayn, the trust of the villagers, and the joy of life he once knew. Jaylen reflected on every moment. He had believed that the crown would bring him happiness and the strength to reclaim what he thought was rightfully his. Instead, it had dragged him into darkness, where envy became his sole companion. Once a kind-hearted and optimistic man, Jaylen had become someone imprisoned by ambition and selfishness. When everything collapsed, the truth became clear to him. Power was not the answer. Wealth could not replace love and sincerity. The crown, despite its brilliant shine, was nothing more than an illusion, a test he had failed. King Zayn, though deeply hurt by Jaylen's actions, chose the path of forgiveness. He did not punish Jaylen, but instead gave him the opportunity to make amends. Jaylen, life is not about what we possess, but about what we do to bring happiness to others, Zayn said before departing, leaving Jaylen in deep silence. Those words, like a torch, lit a path forward for Jaylen. He realized that envy and ambition had blinded him to the true values of life. His friendship with Zayn, his love for Maya, and the respect of the villagers, all had been destroyed because he could not control his desires. After returning the crown, Jaylen began a new journey. He decided to leave the village, not to run away, but to seek forgiveness and discover the true meaning of life. He understood that he needed time to heal the wounds he had caused, not only to others, but also to himself. With each step of his journey, Jaylen carried the lessons of his past. He learned patience, the art of letting go, and how to love without possessing. Though the road ahead was fraught with challenges, he knew it was an opportunity to become a better person. Jaylen's story is not just a tale of envy and betrayal, but a profound lesson in forgiveness and self-awareness. It reminds us that true values in life lie not in power or wealth, but in love, honesty, and the connections we share with one another. But will Jaylen find forgiveness from Zayn and the villagers? Can he mend the mistakes of his past and become a new person? Jaylen's journey does not end here. It has only just begun, and the most profound lessons are still waiting for him along the path ahead. This story is more than just a narrative. It is a reminder to us all of the power of compassion and the value of forgiveness. If Jaylen's story has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and like the video to ensure you don't miss the next chapter of this journey. Share this compelling and heartfelt story with your friends and family in the United States to reflect on its meaningful lessons together. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think Jaylen will do next? Do you believe he deserves forgiveness? Leave a comment below and join the discussion. Don't forget to turn on notifications to follow more emotional and meaningful stories like this one. Let's continue to explore profound life lessons and inspiring tales from around the world. See you in the next chapter.